Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Therese Ratliff, the publisher of the books and devotionals for Bayard in the United States. And I'm happy to welcome you to this event that promises to be a very interesting and quite informative one, along with my co-sponsors, Croix International, Bayard's English language online news daily, and Novalis Publications, Bayard's book publisher in English-speaking Canada. We welcome you from wherever you are across the United States and Canada and from around the globe to what we know will be a great conversation on the first 100 days of America's second Catholic president. Bayard is the publisher of the recent release, Joe Biden and Catholicism in the United States, and I was really fortunate as the publisher to be able to work together with the book's author, Dr. Massimo Faggioli, who joins me today with Robert Mickens from Croix International. Before I introduce our two conversation partners, just a few housekeeping notes. We will be recording today's conversation, and everyone who registered for the event will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording. Unfortunately, there won't be enough time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. However, we will periodically post information on how you can obtain Massimo's book from Novalis in Canada or from Bayard anywhere else around the world. And we're offering a special 25% discount for participants, so you'll want to take note of the special promotion code that will be posted as well. And now I'm really happy to introduce our two conversation partners. Dr. Massimo Faggioli is Professor of Theology and Religious Studies at Villanova University. He's a contributing writer for Commonweal and a regular columnist for Croix International. He's the author of numerous books, essays, and articles published in over 10 languages. And his most recent book, which is the catalyst for our conversation today, was published on January 20th, just as Joe Biden was inaugurated as the 46th President of the United States. Along with Massimo, we're pleased to have Robert Mickens with us. Robert is the editor-in-chief of Croix International and has lived and worked in Rome for 30 years. During that time, he has studied at the Gregorian University, has worked at Vatican Radio, and has been the Rome correspondent for the London Tablet. And he regularly appears on CNN, the BBC, and the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. So Massimo and Robert, I'm really happy to turn this conversation over to you. There's a lot to share as we approach Joe Biden's 100 days in office this week. I believe it's Friday. So let's get to it. Massimo Faggioli and Robert Mickens.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Okay, Massimo Faggioli. Good to see you. You're in the Philadelphia area. You're an Italian and you're in the United States, and I'm an American, and I'm here in Rome looking out at the cathedral of this city, St. John Lateran. It's interesting, I think, that we have this conversation between two people who look at this issue from very unique perspectives. As I said, an Italian who's been living in the United States for a number of years, and an American who's been living in Italy now almost my entire adult life. So I guess I'd want to start by asking you, what was your thinking when you decided to write a book about Joe Biden, the first Catholic president? What did you hope to bring to your readers that perhaps is different from any other person in the United States who would write such a book?
So first of all, it's great to be here with you, Robert, and thank you to Bayard and Novalis and Croix International for organizing this. So this book was a crazy decision made towards the end of the campaign around October, and it's a book that is the product of two different things. So one was the excitement of these last few years. I mean, under Donald Trump, and looking forward to the liberation from sort of Trumpian captivity of the church and of the country. But also, so there was 10 years of thinking on this problem of Catholicism and in American politics, because it's a course that I've been teaching to undergraduates since 2010. So I think that what my specific contribution wanted to be, and I hope it is visible in the book, is that to understand a specific Catholic moment in a specific country, you need, I think, to look at not just from a particular national perspective, but from a global one. So here I am Italian, and I moved to the US in the summer of 2008 during the Obama campaign. And I noticed immediately a certain tendency of the American political, but also ecclesial debate to be extremely America-centered. Mm-hmm. So where everything is measured in terms of the two political parties, but also in terms of what's good for America or for my Catholicism, it's good for global Catholicism. And so these two things align always necessarily. Well, that's not true, I think, because there are a few alignments between Pope Francis and Joe Biden, but there are also significant areas of tension. And so this book is an attempt to offer a queer perspective geographically, so something that, and as an historian, I mean, someone who thinks about every phenomenon in the terms of what are the precedents, the previous moments, the other Catholic candidates, and John Kennedy, the history of anti-Catholicism, and so on. Also explaining to Italian readers, because this book originally was supposed to be in Italian only, what is the history of American anti-Catholicism, which is largely unknown to Italian Catholics, because anti-clericalism is not the same thing that anti-Catholicism. And so this is my experience and my effort, but I'm curious to hear from you what is your perception of the election of this Catholic candidate in Italy and in Rome, because we all know that there's this mythology still of John Kennedy, 1960, Pope John, Vatican II, and how things are perceived now.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that you note here is this idea of being Catholic and being American. And it's my sense that often American Catholics are more American than they are Catholic. And I think even the way they vote for candidates kind of represents their type of Catholicism bends with a type of political alignment, it seems to me. And it's not, I didn't intuit this. I mean, I think other people have written extensively about it. So I guess my question is, looking at Joe Biden, which I will say right from the beginning of this, that when Hillary Clinton was the candidate for the Democratic Party in the last election, I had a sense that in some ways, because of the religion question, but also because of the fierce backlash against the Clintons, the hatred that's almost palpable in segments of the US society, that I could feel as somebody that follows my home country's politics, but I don't live there. I visit, a couple of times a year usually, at the most. But of course, I'm interested in politics and watching this. And I remember when we were getting close to the election, I remember thinking, she can't get elected. And people said, who's going to beat her, Donald Trump? And I was like, well, yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, but I remember I posted on my Facebook page when I was using Facebook, draft Biden. Not because I'm wildly in love with his politics, but I just thought that he would be the sane candidate at the moment that could bring, would be less controversial for some people. I mean, the hatred for the Clintons and Hillary in particular, because she's the woman half it frightened me to think that Donald Trump could beat her. And the night of the election, I was in Ann Arbor, where I keep my voting registration with some cousins that lived there. I remember watching the results come in the early states where, out those flat West states that don't have very many electoral votes. And my cousins were like, oh, we got another big state, Wyoming. I said, this isn't funny. I mean, he's already got millions of votes that he shouldn't get. And I remember going to bed and waking up the next morning. And of course, he won the election by the electoral count. I guess what I want to say is that Joe Biden now becomes the candidate. And I thought in this round, it was his time last time. It's not Joe Biden's time. And it was quite dramatic how everybody folded at a certain point and rallied around him because he seemed to be the safe choice. I think he's been surprising to people in his more liberal, if you want to call it that. I mean, from a European point of view, of course, it's not very liberal. It's not very progressive. I don't think that there is a progressive party in the United States. Bernie Sanders looks like a mainstream social Democrat almost in Europe. I mean, the United States is a very conservative politically, I think, and it's also very American. And that's, I want to go back to this. Joe Biden, as a Catholic, does he bring anything really to the presidency, his Catholicism, or is it just he's more of an American type of a certain type of Catholicism? I mean, is he any more American? We still have, it seems to me, America first is still the policy in the United States. Joe Biden, every time he ends a speech, God bless our troops. I mean, there's a from this perspective, on the other side of the Atlantic, it still looks very isolationist. I mean, he has, stood up to the Russians and re-engaged in the Paris climate accords. He's re-engaged with NATO and the partners. So he's not an isolationist in the sense of Donald Trump. Absolutely not. I mean, he's re-engaging. The question is, to what extent is it going to be a different type of partnership where it's not always America first? And I don't see any indication at this point that that's changed. And we've seen it so far with the approach to vaccines. Now he's doing a backtrack, it looks like. I mean, Bishop McElroy said that from San Diego, just saw an article, I think on the NCR, that said, and he's a part of the Vatican's, a member of the Vatican Dicastery for Integral Human Development, Bishop McElroy. And he said that there are ways the United States and the Holy See can work together on this vaccine issue. But up till now, it's been, the United States is pretty well inoculated. I'm still waiting to be able to even sign up for a vaccine in Italy. And most of Europe is in the same case. Not to talk about Asia and Africa. The United States, and Joe Biden said it, we are going to vaccinate our people first. In a global world with a global pandemic, I don't see how that's feasible. I don't see how it helps to only worry about your own country, because the people of the United States are not going to be able to leave if there's still the virus raging in other parts of the world, because it travels. We know that. So the question is, to me, Massimo, how much does Joe Biden's Catholicism really impact on his administration, his presidency?
So this is the question. I mean, the percentage or the balance between Americanism and Catholicism in this church, it's the eternal question. So I believe that as a European who came here 13 years ago, I made peace with the idea that to run for office in this country, a certain kind of belief in American exceptionalism is part of the job description. It's inevitable. And it sounds awkward, I have to say, a certain, emphasis on our troops, but that sounds more awkward to my old ears. I mean, my new ears are used to that. So here, if one looks at the first 100 days of his presidency, I believe that there are, some signs of movements in a certain direction. And I want to go back to what you said, that he should have been elected in the previous election, which is true. And I want to make a parallel here with the papal election. So we could say the same thing for Jorge Mario Bergoglio. I mean, he should have been elected in 2005 in some sense, but back then, I believe, both Bergoglio and Joe Biden 4 years ago, they would have not been as courageous on some issues. So here, as if we see Pope Francis doing something that is and or looks courageous in comparison to Pope Benedict on synodality, on gay people, and so on, something like that probably can be said also for Joe Biden, because in these last 4 years, under Donald Trump, it has become clear the collapse of the neoliberal ideology in economics. It has become clear a certain crisis of the globalization that, 4 years ago probably was not that evident. And so here, I believe that Joe Biden is essentially a moderate, a centrist, that in his political life has found a home in the Democratic Party, but in the more moderate wing. Now, the circumstances, the overall positioning of the Republican Party, of some Catholics in this country, I believe have pushed him a little towards to the left. And as I write in the book, from the point of view of the policy platform, last year, the real Catholic candidate was Bernie Sanders on healthcare, but I believe that it's a lesson that Biden and the party overall have learned. And so on the issue of economic policy and of international relations, it is, I believe, more courageous than what the Obama administration was and Joe Biden was as vice president. Now, if there's something on which this administration and this Catholic president has a harder time moving towards the left, is on a certain America, not first, but America-centered worldview. Because if one looks at the policies that he has, done something in these last 100 years, the most cautious of all areas is exactly on immigration and refugees. He knows that unfortunately there is a resentment, an anti-immigrant resentment that is probably larger than just Trump voters. And so that will be an interesting thing to see for us who are privileged and don't need, big changes, because this is, as we know, the number one issue on which Pope Francis has talked about from day one, every single day or every other day. And
Are you surprised? Are you surprised that the Catholic Joe Biden? The whole the inauguration, you could have very easily mistaken this for some kind of Catholic ceremony. Could have been the inauguration of the president of a Catholic university or something. It was extremely, the symbolism, even his language. Presidents are usually very careful to bring in sectarian very specific, Catholic or Lutheran. It's usually very vague. There's kind of a civil or a civic religion. There's kind of a vague feeling of being deists or Christian deists, but not too much being aligned with one particular denomination. Biden was not at all afraid. I mean, he was very unabashedly Catholic in that inauguration, the way it was planned, his address. But there's a different. Catholicism in the United States is very uniquely American. It has, many Catholics don't agree with Pope Francis's views on certain issues, such as immigration, I would say. And then you also have different sets of Catholics in the United States, beginning with the bishops. Let's talk about Biden and what these next 4 years are going to be like in his relationship with dealing with the bishops of the United States, and if there's any clue in that in these first 100 days.
So you mentioned the conspicuous Catholic content of the inauguration, which was interesting also to understand what is his relationship with the church in this country, because in the ceremony, it was, I believe, masterful that you had a strong Jesuit presence, which embodies the more progressive wing of Catholicism, and in his speech, a mention of Augustine, who's the hero of a more conservative Catholic culture. So here Biden has tried, at least symbolically, to walk a path that is in the middle between different souls of this church. That's something that hasn't been picked up by the conservative Catholics in this country, especially from the USCCB, that on that very day, I mean, January 20th, they sent a very stark message to the new president, which was very different from the message on the same day, I mean, same hour almost, of the Vatican, of Pope Francis. So, as you pointed out in one of your articles, in these last 8 years of Pope Francis' pontificate, all bishops that have been appointed or promoted by Francis in the United States, not even one has been elected by the USCCB in an important position as president, not just of the conference, but also of an Episcopal committee. So what we see now is that there is still a majority of bishops in the USCCB that have embraced a conservative and I would say Republican culture, not just on abortion, but on many other issues. If one looks at the messaging of the US Bishop Conference on vaccination, basically, it is clearly a libertarian message. I mean, you should get vaccinated if you think it's good for you. And so there's no reference to the fact that it is actually part of keeping the common good. So that is a conference that in its majority, it's still largely identified with a very strong opposition against the Democratic Party that finds its capital point on abortion for obvious reasons, but other issues have been added with LGBT, transgender, and religious liberty issues in these last 12 years, since the election of Barack Obama. Those bishops that exist in this country that have signaled that they want to work with this president, they want to cooperate, they want to engage, are a small minority. And they are active and they are visible on an individual basis. And there's very little coordination among them. And some of them have become important in the eyes of the Vatican and Pope Francis. This is to mention Bishop McElroy of San Diego, Cardinal Tobin of Newark, Cardinal Supich in Chicago, but it's always in an individual basis. And so this is what this administration is facing, which is a church that is politically divided roughly 50-50.
So what does that mean then what does Catholicism, or the fact that the president happens to be Catholic, and even a Catholic, a church-going Catholic, or, there's a question about how devout he is, how much he really is a Catholic, but without a doubt, he's a practicing Catholic. He always has been. He diverges on some issues. I think his party has forced him in some ways, in order to be the candidate and the leader of that party. He's had to change his position, become a little bit more in favor of certain issues, such as abortion. I think he was more nuanced before this last cycle, much more. But my question is, the fact that he's Catholic, does it make a difference in a country where the Catholics are so divided?
It does make a difference, I believe, because it is first of all an interruption in the trajectory of what many Catholics expected from the future, which was going to be inevitably, undeniably conservative. So which is something that those same Catholics were saying in 2013, when Pope Benedict resigned and they were preparing for the Congress. Say, well, it will be another John Paul II, another. So that, history is full of surprises. And so that's one thing. Second, because Joe Biden, whether the bishops, like it or not, or they realize it or not, is the most visible Catholic leader in his country. So he offers symbolically and personally a certain style of leadership in terms of language, in terms of ethos of being a public person, which is different not just from Donald Trump, obviously, but also from many bishops in the media and on social media. That has an impact that is largely unconscious. Now, if we expect of this president to be able to transform the Catholic Church, I believe it's overly optimistic to think that. But certainly, to give an idea, it has a bigger impact having a Catholic president in a country like the US than having a Catholic prime minister in Italy right now. Mario Draghi, was a student of the Jesuits, but it's not the same relationship between church and state, faith and culture. So here Biden offers something different. And I believe that there is now this, stalemate between bishops in the USCCB that no one can solve, not even Pope Francis. Not the White House, but not even the Vatican. And so this is something that is afflicting the US Bishop Conference. And we have seen that in these last few months when some bishops, cardinals, they were tired of this angry messaging, monothematic, monofocal emphasis on some issues. And they've said that openly, which is kind of new. So here, Joe Biden, I believe that the biggest challenge is that it's a presidency that in the long run will have to send some messages also to those who didn't vote for him and would never vote for him. So here, for example, on the whole issue of the bioethical issues, it would be important at some point to send a message that we are in charge now and we change policies because we're in charge now. It makes sense politically, but in the long run, so there should be a new script, a new way of talking about those issues, rather than giving the impression of a reversal of fronts, of fortunes.
So winner takes all kind of thing.
Right, exactly. That's something on which I believe Biden personally would be able to do that. His party is a different story.
All right. Um, let's talk about the abortion issue, because that's the big one. Certainly for the Catholics that did not vote for Joe Biden, and even for a lot of Catholics that did. Abortion is a major issue. I mean, I think that in the United States, the church, Catholic Church, and the bishops are fanatical on this issue. I'm sorry to say, I'm against abortion, but there's one thing about decriminalizing abortion. There's one, there are different levels of this. There's different strategies. If the strategy is to eliminate, to have fewer abortions, I mean, I don't think anybody really honestly believes that if you outlaw abortion, if you overdo Roe v. Wade tomorrow, that this is going to get rid of abortion, and it's going to cause a lot of problems. Because one thing I think is very clear in US history of civil rights, and whether you see this as a civil right or a murder, I think it's posed in that term. This is a right. One thing is pretty clear, that once rights are granted or achieved in the United States, they're not withdrawn. We have the issue of prohibition. That did not work. They thought that they could repeal legal alcohol, etc. It didn't work, because it's a right. And it will be the same way. It's the same way with divorce. These things do not get turned back. And I think the Catholic Church, I mean, I've accused, not just I have done this, but others, accused the strategy of the US bishops especially, to change the law rather than change consciences, and to get people to stop having abortions, rather than put all the onus on they put all the onus on the legislature and the courts to change the laws, rather than to, we don't see that there are fewer Catholics having abortions than any other women in the United States. But this is an issue that's peculiar in the United States, I think, as someone who's lived in Europe now for almost 35 years, I don't see that this would be a big issue. You talk about, we have an Italian prime minister here in Italy. And does anyone know what his view is on abortion? I don't think anyone's asked. It's not an issue. Now, some Catholics in the United States might think that we're not very good Catholics. I know there are certain writers in the pantheon of the conservative church in the United States who think that, the whole church in Europe has gone to hell in a handbasket. But I don't believe that, by the way. But perhaps you could explain a little bit the tricky question of abortion, and how that's a bit different in the United States and from, the classic European Catholic politics.
So, as you mentioned earlier, immediately after Roe v. Wade in 73 and in the 70s, Joe Biden was much more moderate on the issue of abortion. And then in time, he has followed the trajectory of the Democratic Party. So what's interesting in having a Catholic president on this is that he has articulated that problem. And even before being elected president, in a famous interview with American magazines, so with the classical Catholic distinction between my personal position and what, as a politician, I can do or I should do for the country. And so this is something that a Catholic can do much more than an evangelical and a born-again Christian president, because that distinction of spheres, it's something that is very particular of the Catholic Church, and really not of the Protestant churches, especially of American Protestantism. And so he has been careful in not picking a fight with the Catholic teaching, which he said he accepts. It is different, though, in these last few years. Why? And also compared to Europe. Why? Because the legislation on abortion in the United States was never passed by Congress, but it was the making of the Supreme Court, which has produced a legislation allowing abortion, which is much more liberal or much more extreme than in most countries, especially European countries. So that's why the distinction I'm personally against, but I cannot, it becomes more difficult to sustain. That's certainly true. So here you were mentioning Italy. It's interesting that in Italy, but even in other European countries, the issue of abortion has become a consensual issue in the sense that all political parties agree that there needs to be some kind of legal protection for women who decide that. And at the same time, it's a social problem that cannot be left morally on the shoulders of the one individual woman. And so there has to be a social protection in charge of making sure that that choice is not the only choice. So here, for example, I mean, Italy, it has been since the 1970s that even the parties of the political right no longer dream of overturning the legalization of abortion. It's not a leftist thing in Europe. It has become part of a non-controversial. It is different in those countries where it has been legalized recently, like Ireland, for example, or Malta, or other small countries. But so that is different. So here, that remains the number one issue for abortion, for the Catholic alignment, especially of the bishops and of intellectuals. I was struck because a few days ago I watched an interview with one of the most, visible bishops in the US, Bishop Robert Barron, the auxiliary of Los Angeles, who confessed, I would be very, very happy to go back to Bill Clinton in the 90s, who famously said abortion should be legal, safe, and rare. So if Robert Barron misses Bill Clinton's mantra on abortion, it means that both cultures have drifted away into ideological corners, I believe, and that will remain an issue because now there are different tactics, because now the pro-life movement wants to give back that issue to individual states. It's no longer the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., but at the same time, we know that all judges that were appointed by Donald Trump, the number one issue was abortion. So it is still the most defining issue for the relationship between the Catholic Church and politics in the United States.
Let's turn a little bit to because this issue of abortion, we'll talk about this forever, and I don't know where there's going to be any kind of common ground. The bishops can't even. It's interesting that you quote Robert Barron, Bishop Barron, saying that phrase, Bill Clinton. If the bishops could start to even talk like that, there would maybe be some kind of breakthrough. But let's leave that. Let's look at the presidency, this administration, and the Holy See. One of the things that Joe Biden is going to have to do in the next several weeks is select an ambassador to the Holy See. This will be a tricky choice, I think, because he's a Catholic, and there's a perception that the ambassador to the Holy See represents the Catholic Church to the Holy See, which is not true at all, or should in some way represent the bishops to the Holy See, just because of the way the ambassadors, at least that's my perspective. I think that living here where the ambassador resides, I've watched these ambassadors, and they've been almost all of them, every single one of them actually, except one, have been political either donors of the victorious president who names them to that post, or they've been certainly supporters of the policy. Obviously, you're the envoy of the president to the Holy See, to the Vatican. But this one's tricky because if Joe Biden does what every other president has done and chooses a Catholic, it could further divide, or let's say it would just exacerbate the anger or the tribalism within the church in the United States. How do you see this choice that he has for a new ambassador?
So I hope I can answer to this, even if I'm not a citizen. I'm a green card holder, so there are boundaries to what I can say about politics. But so here, I hope it will be one who can send a signal of unity, a non-partisan personality as much as possible. Someone who has, some record of working at least with some of the bishops. So it is complicated also because of these last 4 years, because during the Trump administration, the relations were very difficult between Washington and the Vatican. So it will have to, rebuild a trust, and it will not be about the obvious convergence on policies like environment or immigrants, refugees, but also on those issues where there is hidden disagreement on the Middle East, on Latin America, because we know that, Washington and Pope Francis looked at Latin America in very different ways historically, of course. So here, I believe that there's one interesting thing. So here, Joe Biden is the first Catholic president who can send an ambassador to the Holy See, because John Kennedy, 1960, the US did not have an embassy to the Holy See. And Joe Biden is a real Catholic. He is a believer. He is a practicing Catholic. So I suspect he will take a more curious look at who will present him, because I believe that both Biden and Francis have something in common, but one thing also, that they cannot stand hypocrisy. So, religious hypocrisy, that is at the center of the encyclical of Pope Francis, Fratelli Tutti, by the way, so that you pretend you're religious because it serves your politics, your party, and so on. This is something that they have in common, I believe. And so it will be interesting to see who's the choice, and what kind of mandate, because we know that, the ambassador is not just his or her personality, but it fits a certain moment, a certain policy or agenda. That will be interesting, and it will be surely different from Ambassador Callista Gingrich, because the US Embassy to the Holy See had become a hub of a certain kind of international anti-European Union, anti-Pope Francis symbol, despite all the good work that was done by Callista Gingrich, as I've heard. That it's an embassy that will have to be resignified from a public point of view.
Do you think it's possible that he would choose a non-Catholic as ambassador to the Holy See?
It's certainly possible. It would be interesting to see a Baptist or a Protestant or a Jewish US ambassador to the Holy See. That would be interesting. I have to say, I am inclined to see a Catholic, because, being Catholic gives you, in an unconscious way sometimes, an understanding of the complexity of what Rome is, what the Vatican is, what the Catholic Church is. So that it is really complex, and it is, I believe, more connatural for a member of the Catholic Church to have navigated those different. So here, for example, I believe that a Catholic ambassador would more naturally stand his or her ground to Catholic bishops, for example, than a non-Catholic bishop who could maybe be intimidated or not knowing exactly what, or maybe it could be the opposite. I mean, Catholic could be intimidated much more than a Jewish rabbi representing the US to the Holy See, but that it all depends on the person. And I would be surprised, for example, if it's a big donor. It would not really fit how Pope Francis understands the Vatican these days. So it is possible, but it would be, I believe, counterintuitive.
What do you think Biden's next, or perhaps first move should be in trying to get more support, if you will, from the American bishops to try to, I mean, it's very clear that they, from the message, from the speeches during the campaign, from what a number of priests, now they're not bishops, but priests who've been able to espouse some of the alt-right craziness that Donald Trump kind of fomented without any kind of penalty. I mean, many of these priests, I don't know of any priests that have been suspended or punished because of some of this really I don't know what you call it, anti-humanity. But there is something is broken. Now I know Joe Biden, the president of the United States, doesn't get elected to heal his own faith community, but he's in a particularly influential position, as you point out, that what he does will have an effect. What should he do to lower the temperature, to help maybe an olive branch? Is there something he could do to at least begin a true conversation with the bishop?
Well, maybe this is happening or already, I don't know, but it would be time to open a channel of communication with the USCCB, the bishops, because that would really cut off the more ideological of them. I don't believe, honestly, that Archbishop Gomez, the president of ECB, is an ideologue. I believe he can be seen in the hands of ideologues, and so that's something that should be tried on a personal level. So let's see what we can do together, and I will explain what I can do, what I cannot do, what I would like to do, but it's impossible. Unfortunately, I mean, all these conversations now happen much more than before on screens, via newspapers, and so on. This is something that we didn't see when, for example, I mean, Father John Ryan was advising FDR in the 30s to a personal connection, and so I don't think we will go back there, but we should avoid having something like what happened between November and January, which was really a signal of a minimal ethos of institutional communication breaking down from the part of the US bishops. This is what I would say is a start that the sooner the better, I would say.
I mean, there are issues that they can work on. I mean, I think the immigration issue. I mean, the bishops are pretty strong on that. And I mean, and Joe Biden has shown to not be so good on that so far. I mean, he's not up the quotas. I think in the United States in the last 30 years, the population has dropped, and
Right.
a number of states have lost congressional seats recently because population has dropped. It's also shifting in the country, obviously, but this is something. Do you think that is there goodwill on? Can the bishops put aside their fixation on abortion and work with him? I mean, Francis, the policy of Pope Francis is very different from his predecessor in that
Right.
it's not, you can work with people that do things you don't like or you vehemently disagree with on other issues, but
It doesn't happen often to me, but here I want to quote Pope Benedict. When was asked, what do you think, Holy Father, of Joe Biden and his position on abortion, Pope Benedict, with his usual clarity, replied, well, it's not him, it's his party. Which is true. And so it's not a personal conviction of the candidate or the president, but it's the expression of a political culture that, involves half of the country. It's not his personal problem. So that's how they should look at this issue. It's something that makes no sense to pursue against one individual person, his communion, his access to the sacraments or not. It's a huge cultural issue, and I believe the Catholic Church should continue to teach magisterially what it teaches, but at the practical level, I don't think it can be imagined that half of this country is excommunicated. And so this it needs to happen, because I don't think those bishops have gained authority or much of reputation these last 4 years under Donald Trump, and in these last 4 months or 5 months since Joe Biden's election. So I suspect this is happening already. And it's not just for the sake of this presidency, but of this Catholic Church, honestly.
perhaps do you think that he's going to have to work with just some individual bishops if the conference itself cannot unite around a certain,
Sure, it's a big conference, but there's also the office of the presidency, which has an institutional role. It represents the Catholic Church, and so I believe they realize that it's not about how much I, individual bishop, like him or not. So there is a danger that everything is reduced to sympathies or antipathies, and so this country has solid institutions that I believe have resisted the assault of Donald Trump. To be sure that, they have resisted really. I believe that this Catholic president and this USCCB could demonstrate that they can at least entertain a frank dialogue, as they say in diplomacy, where when they disagree, they say we had an honest and frank conversation. Well, that would be a start, because
now,
right now,
obviously the church is not just the bishops, not by a long shot. How do you see American Catholics? The people in the pews. How important is it to them, or that their president is Catholic, like they are?
It's important, even though the greatest thing about Joe Biden's president is that you don't have to think about Joe Biden every day. Okay, that's great. Okay, but it's a signal of restoring some sanity and some normalcy and some ethos in public life. That sense, I can tell you from my kids, my students, and I don't educate 24 hours my students, but you could see, so that they see something that is more normal in this presidency. That is not to underestimate, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's, I think you hit a lot of different issues here. We'll have to see. We're coming up to the 100th day, I guess, on Friday. And there are signs. Thanks for pointing out some of them and sharing your thoughts, because I think it's fascinating that somebody from a different culture living in the United States, like you, there were things here 35 years ago that I thought were so bizarre that today I just take for granted. You know, God bless our troops. We don't do that here, but there are other things that I would have never thought were normal, that's the way it is.
Thank you, Robert. It's been great. Thank you very much.
Well, Massimo and Robert, thank you both so much for this conversation. We have covered a lot of ground here. There's just been a wealth of information and insight on the intersection of politics and the church. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but there's so much more that could be said about race relations, more on immigration. The topics are really endless. Really, these first 100 days have been an extraordinary flurry of activity. And maybe I could ask each of you if there's just one word or a phrase that really sums up this time for the global community and the church, and maybe hopes as we look towards the future. What would that be for you? Robert, what would you say?
I would say the realization that we are one global family. I think the Pope has tried to hammer this away. We're slow at getting the message. We're in a period of, I mean, we've been knocked to our knees in a sense with this pandemic, and we're still slow. But I think that this is this sense that we're all in the same boat. We're all in this together. It's going to take a while to really flesh that out. But I think our young people, they'll live through this experience of pandemic in a different way than older people, and probably in a way that people lived through the Second World War in London.
Right.
Will mark them. So I think we're all in the same boat. We're all in this
different perspectives. And what about you, Massimo? What's one word or theme that stays with you as we move forward?
I think it's empathy that connects really Francis and Joe Biden. It's the idea that I care. I would say that.
We've heard a lot of that for sure. Well, thank you both so much. You've given us so much to think about. To everyone who's joined us in this conversation, I hope you found it as eye-opening as I did. Please keep an eye on your mailbox for our follow-up email. Remember to take advantage of that special 25% discount on the book, Joe Biden and Catholicism in the United States. And have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.